Romantic. Hello, Mr. Luddite Romantic. I thought that was one of the best videos I've ever seen on YouTube, and especially the Pikachu related part was great. Um, I had written in my notes a while ago when I watched the video when it was brand new. I sort of watched it a little, kind of skimmed it just now, because I couldn't understand my notes. Sometimes I write notes that are like they're really useful if I use them right away. If I use them too much later, so, for example, one thing I noticed is I had at the top written the doing being dichotomy is still useful, and you had actually said the actuality potentiality dichotomy. Well, first of all, the doing being distinction dichotomy is still useful. Just like Newtonian mechanics is still useful. But you said the actuality potentiality dichotomy, and the interesting thing here is that in quantum mechanics, not necessarily in my perceptualism, but in quantum mechanics, which I adopt as part of my materialism. Um, the potentiality is a physically real thing. Potentialities exist. A potential measurement exists, uh, somehow encapsulated in the waveform, in many forms, and therefore in its potential forms. And actuality, so it's an interesting thing for me because, yes, actuality and potentiality both have a lot of value and are actually both material things um, in quantum mechanics. But there's not necessarily a dichotomy. You see, the potentiality is also physical. So where's the dichotomy? You have a physical thing and an unphysical thing. You have a thing that's present and a thing that's potentially present, or present in the future. So, yeah, I'm all willing to say these dichotomies are useful, but then you threw me a curve when I listened again. So there might be other things where I get off where I didn't hit that part in the skimming. I will grant that the world exists and the presentism and free will versus determinism. We both object to some kinds of determinism. And I like to look at this through a philosophy of time. Now I notice time, while it should be a literal experience, right, because we're built around time. In fact, we use spatial metaphor to understand time. So let me just say that. Now, you said that the point of a model is to get the essence of something. Well, look, this is a motivational factor. It's like if the reason you pick up litter is to make the world a better place, but the world doesn't end up a better place because somebody else trashes litter, but then it was better in that location, and so on and so forth, then you could go ahead and have a motivation that is God tells you, or whatever motivation you want. In the case of making a model, yeah, it feels like getting at the essence, but really, that's just how we view it, as getting at the essence. It should be a systems analysis. Okay, there's no essence involved. When you speak of essence or feel the search for essence, which I do as like a system designer, about which I'm almost, you know, religious. I'm spiritual about systems. Um, when you speak of essence or this feeling you have, then it's just a shorthand for your design philosophy. The essence of a system is how you would hope it works. What responsibilities you have encapsulated. And you'll find for practical reasons you almost always have to break uh, that design philosophy, that essence. You're almost always somewhere. Not in every subsystem, that's why I say almost always, but in an actual total system that is working in the real world, you generally will have to break that, um, you know, that mathematical beauty, and, um, and thus again, there's no actual essence. It's just a model. We want it to work this way so we can keep it clear in our heads. You mentioned the same river, and we can't get in the same river twice. That statement that it might relate, and it does relate a lot. In fact, the fact that my epistemology solves that problem is one of the reasons that I believe in it. And actually, there's more to it than that for me personally, because when I was young in the summers, I canoed and swam California rivers, and to me, they have a lot of metaphorical power. But the reason this is important is because, again, it's this being and doing distinction. If you're trying to define the river in terms of what it is, then you will tend to think of it as water. But if you define it in terms of what it does, then it's the whole system. It's really the whole system. In other words, even, the ocean is a part of that water system. The evaporation and then the sending of that evaporated water up to the mountains where it comes down again, that whole system is the river, and thus you do step in the same river twice if you define the river in terms of what it does, because it keeps doing the same thing, and continuously so. Now, the being, some people give this Heidegger view of, well, being is becoming, that's what you're doing. In which case, if you define being as a kind of becoming, which is, a sort of at least a changing status, then you can approximate it, just like Ptolemy approximated a heliocentric solar system with his epicycles. But you could just go to the simpler thing and define the stuff in terms of the doing, and we call it the same river, right? So you and I, we all think it's the same river, and you go, but technically it's not the same river. Not that you specifically do that, but people are going, oh, well, no, it's called the same river. Technically, it is the same river, and we need to figure out how it could be the same. Well, if there was no way, we'd have to give up our definition of the river, but there is a way. If you define the river in terms of what it does, it continues to do this. You go to the crossing of the Edwards Crossing, the Yuba River, and it is, the river, you will see, is still doing the same thing. It's the same system. Yes, the material is different, but so the material of you is different too. Okay. You made a good point about function and malfunction. Exactly. Anything that has an essence, and I think you were quoting, anything that has an essence, and this is part of the hint of quantum mechanics, that there's always malfunction. And the explanation of why there always is because quantum mechanics, while the statistical strangeness and weird probability nature of quantum particles, statistically generally averages out, it does lead to this issue of there will always be malfunction. Okay, and the other good point from that quote is that the function is to perform in a system. So the function of a thing, so this is Ptolemaic epicycles in order to approximate what you get directly by thinking of it in terms of action. Instead of thinking of things and their function, you just think of systems and their actions. Then you don't have to have an extra thing that says they perform in a system. They automatically perform in a system. Okay. I find it interesting you're trying to put your finger on my ontological error. Well, I don't know if you've seen any of my videos on ontology and metaphysics, but there is no a priori or deducible reality. The whole point with quantum mechanics is, as we zero in and go, hey, I can't get absolute truth, but I've gotten so close, it can't be anything but something so narrow that I could say it is that narrow range. The problem with that is quantum mechanics, within the narrow range, it's fundamentally distributed in potentials. So you get down there to find that one thing, and you go, oh, I've looked so close that I've seen its many things at once. Okay, so there's no essences, and and to demonstrate that, there's the logical argument of that a thing that is always a system can't have an essence, and also there's never been an essence demonstrated. Okay, there has never been. You haven't found them. Don't you think you have to find one? If all you ever find is approximations, and I have a theory of approximations, even if I'm wrong and there are essences in the real world, we can only use a theory of approximations. Makes it more useful. Okay. I like the string and the kite thing. I've always said this, there's these kinds of dichotomies. For two things to be separated, they have to be connected. The space that separates them is the space that connects them. For an artist to be free and paint anything they want, they have to choose a palette and what kind of paints, and they limit themselves through constraints. And this is what I say about free will, is that, of course, nothing is totally free. There's always going to be constraints. And the string and the kite is a very interesting thing. If I had more time, I'd talk about it right now, and about the duality in dichotomy and apparent contradiction. Cheers.